Sweet. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much, Rachel, for introducing me. My name is Sam Iatarola. I work at Marshall University. I'm the coordinator of Adventure Recreation. Today, we're going to be talking about tools and strategies for giving and receiving feedback. This is going to be a rather interactive and experiential presentation today. I'm going to ask that everyone pulls open their phones. We're going to give this a go, and we're going to go to slido.com. So you can do that right now. It's going to be a way for me to ask some questions, have you all kind of share some different thoughts. We're going to collaborate over this topic today, and enter the code 91537. Should be at the top right of the screen the entire presentation. So go ahead and pull your smartphones out and give that a shot. If you can't, if Slido's not working, feel free to throw something in the Zoom chat all day. That's totally fine. And I'll try to check that, or maybe Rachel or Stephanie, if you see something, just feel free to holler at me, let me know. So yeah, sweet. So first question today, where are you coming from today? Where is everyone at? So go ahead and type your answer into Slido and press send. Sweet. Awesome. All over the East Coast. Berea, Kentucky, Penn State, Fairmont. Nice. UAB, Virginia, Boston College. Sweet. That's cool. Awesome. All right. So talking about feedback today, I'm going to ask that you consider some of these questions. So what is feedback and why is it important? What is challenging about feedback? When do you use feedback as a professional? What are some strategies to improve upon giving feedback? And how can we create a culture of giving feedback in our organizations? And why is that important? And maybe some other questions that you might have. So go ahead. We're going to keep going. This is going to be super interactive, everyone. So what are you interested in gaining from this presentation today? What do you want to learn with regards to giving feedback? This can be, you can just throw in a couple words, or if you've got any questions that you want me to maybe hit on, go for it. No rules here. Awesome. So a lot of good stuff is coming in. So just ideas on giving feedback, best practices, innovative techniques, best approach to giving feedback to a supervisor. So someone who supervises you. Upward feedback is what we call that. Presenting feedback to my peers, kind of the concept of like peer leadership. How do we give feedback across? How to ask about getting constructive feedback about self. Super important. You know, if you're not getting that feedback, how do you know if you're doing well or doing your job? Being concise, being effective, coaching others on how to receive feedback. Awesome. We will definitely hit on that today. I'm seeing a lot on constructive feedback, giving more positive feedback and turning feedback into positive improvements. Awesome. So really hitting on what people are doing well. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. We'll definitely make sure to hit on all those things. So sweet. Okay, so we'll just start from the very top. What is feedback? So definition. Um, I'll let you read those definitions on the screen, but I kind of highlighted or bolded the important parts. So feedback is a basis for improvement. So believing that improving or growing is kind of the underlying expectation there. Being evaluative or corrective even, and sometimes so that kind of constructive side of things as well. Sweet. Feedback, these are kind of just my anecdotal opinion-based thoughts, so take it or leave it. Feedback should center around constructive improvement. Feedback is more than just normative communication, and thus it is a skill that must be practiced. Feedback can be an act of service, and feedback can also make or break many aspects of an organization, and really can make or break aspects of relationships as well. So kind of getting some thoughts going around feedback. So we're going to keep going, start talking about different types of feedback. So there are lots of different words that we kind of hear: positive, negative, constructive, corrective. There's lots of different models, and I've picked one that I really like. So you've got positive feedback is the word I'm going to stick with. Constructive. Then we're going to splice it up into vague and specific. So positive feedback that is vague is kind of like a piece of candy, right? Like a Jolly Rancher. It tastes good. It feels good for a second. It's sweet. It's nice. We love Jolly Ranchers. But it doesn't last that long. It's not something that really that we can take with us for too long. So, you know, it's like that, like, hey, you're doing great. Well, what am I doing great? Like, what about that am I doing great with, right? So yeah, positive, vague. Constructive and vague feedback, it's kind of like burning someone. It's like lighting a fire under someone. It kind of hurts. It's not, we don't really know what we're doing well. It's like, it's hurtful. It doesn't feel good. So I think you can probably kind of tell vague versus being specific is kind of where we don't want to be versus where we want to be. So positive specific feedback can be like giving someone a gift. It's highlighting aspects of somebody else that they're doing well and being specific about that. So like, for example, if you're maybe competitive sports, you're chatting with your official after a game. Hey, official, I appreciate you did a good job with how you enunciated when you were giving the calls, or you were being timely with calling fouls or something like that. I don't really know much about sports, so adventure. Sorry, I don't know if that's right or not. But you're highlighting something specific, and that is sort of like giving a gift that maybe they'll be able to take with them. It's like, okay, I'm good at being specific on these calls. I'm going to keep doing that. Moving on to being specific with constructive feedback, it's kind of like sharpening a tool, which is really a big part about this, this presentation today. When we're specific about constructive feedback, we're kind of sharpening someone else's tool for them, or inviting them to do that themselves. It's like, hey, here is something specific that you can work on. And we want that. We want to know, like, how can we better improve ourselves and go further with our careers, our relationships, whatever. And so knowing to be specific, even when giving constructive feedback, is super important. So this is actually an activity that I really like to use more in person. I've never actually done this over a PowerPoint before. I usually will, I'm a big experiential education person, and I We'll do this with leader trainings or staff trainings. Use it all the time. And you just some simple materials. I just get a lighter for the fire, candy, like a bow for a present, some rope and string, and I use these metaphors with my staff oftentimes or participants on a leadership-based trip to talk about the different types and set expectations for feedback. It's like, hey, as we're on this backpacking trip, please be specific with what isn't going so well for you and help us help you. So some discussion questions that you could ask for in this activity is to explore, like, how do you like to give feedback? How do you like to receive feedback? How does it make you feel when you receive vague feedback, and how would you potentially respond? And then kind of drawing it back to the bigger picture of your team or organization. How does this team give or receive, or does this team give or receive the right amount of feedback? And what can this team do to create a culture to communicate feedback more effectively? So yeah, that's a tool for you right there. So let's talk a bit more about specifically giving feedback. So we're going to go back to our Slido. So go ahead and input, what are some characteristics just in general of effective feedback? Go ahead and brainstorm, throw it out there. Awesome. Great. We've got our buzzword specific three times. That's great. This is awesome, everyone. Doesn't tear an individual down. Awesome. So, also going along with culminating in a goal. Why are we gathering here today to talk about why are we giving feedback today? What's the purpose? Reflecting on that. Really love the relevant and using examples, drawing connections, using concrete, specific examples that backs up feedback. That's awesome. Tone, so recognizing your communication. What are the words coming out of your mouth that, or what is the tone of the communication that's happening to give that feedback? Love the timing and location. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. Awesome. Great thoughts, everyone. So a couple just tips, or you can call them strategies, more so just tips on giving feedback. So being direct. This is kind of where let me pause really quick. These tips are kind of where, in my experience, is that feedback is more than just normative conversation. These are some things that where you really have to be careful and considerate and intentional with feedback. So being direct, being specific with examples, identifying trends. So maybe being conscious as far as like, okay, a referee missed a call once, but did they only miss a call once? Did they miss a call the whole game? So identifying trends and even sometimes annotating that as well. Sometimes it's hard to bring something up if they're like, oh, I don't always do that. Well, here are a couple examples as to how. Owning your feelings is super important. So that's kind of like that, using those I statements. So how are you being effective as someone that is giving that feedback? That's using I statements versus immediately blaming, like, hey, you are doing this wrong. that doesn't feel good. This is how your actions might be making me feel. We have the right to be able to share that. Timely, we already kind of hit that, being timely about it, so not waiting forever. Somebody mentioned detailed. I might offer limit the information. So if you ask to check in with someone and then you just like be like, hey, this is everything that you're doing in your whole last 2 years of working here. For feedback to be effective, there's only so much that we can hear at once, right? So kind of be intentional about like, what am I about to deliver? What gift am I about to give, or tool am I about to sharpen for this person? I see something came through in the chat. Oh, great with the sports related metaphors. Awesome. My coworkers will know that I'm terrible at the sports stuff, but I'm trying. I did win an I Am Champ shirt this past spring, so I will say that. Cool. Sweet. Limit information and offering constructive suggestions. So that could be you maybe hit on the maybe if this is a constructive feedback sort of session, you maybe take ownership for how you're feeling, share what is might be bothering you, and then immediately go into brainstorming like, hey, here, moving forward, let's not dwell on the past all too much, but moving forward, what can we do to be better here? Know your audience. So this is where understanding how, this person that you might be giving feedback to, trying your best to understand how they might want to hear it. So maybe by knowing your staff person, maybe by even going through this activity ahead of time with your staff and be like, hey, how do you guys like to give feedback? Check your communication, be aware that this is something where I think we said something early on about, having good intentions and without, hopefully hurting anybody's feelings. Be aware of your communication there. Pay attention to responses. If it's not going well, you have the reserve, you reserve the right to change direction and try something new. Balance positive and constructive feedback. And it maybe that balance doesn't even have to happen in that one session. Just be conscious of, if you're maybe giving feedback to a staff person, am I always just saying, hey, you're doing a great job? Nope, you're doing awesome. I know that I'm guilty of that, of some of those staff that are just like, they're rock stars for me. Sometimes, I could serve to be like, hey, here's something you can improve on, because we can always all improve on stuff. Okay, I've got a couple of tools for us here. So a little bit of my background. I used to lead 30-day canoe trips for at-risk youth, and we had a lot of curriculum on communication, and this is where I really learned a lot in that position, and have stolen even some of that curriculum or different buzzwords or topics, and move forward with that in my life, professionally and personally. So anyways, some of that has come from there. So a CFR is a one-way feedback giving tool. So you don't have to, the nice thing about it is that you can use it pretty by the book. So you express a concern, you share how you're feeling, and then you make a request. So for example, my concern is that, let's say we're like eating a shared lunch. My concern is that you ate all of the peanut butter jelly sandwiches. It makes me feel left out in this lunch experience. And my request is that you share some peanut butter jelly sandwiches for the rest of us. Simple as that. So kind of adding some structure to like, okay, I'm about to give feedback. I know what I want to say, but then nothing comes out. So it's kind of a little bit of structure of like, sharing your concern with your experience, with what's going on. You can speak to your experience, your concern with the scenario, share how it's making you feel, and then maybe make a request on moving forward from there. So that is the CFR. Just wanted to talk briefly on ownership and self-feedback. So this to me, you could use this in a lot of different ways, or this concept in a lot of different ways. But for me, ownership is super important with like staff culture, or really just, I try to consider it when I'm running the rock wall a lot, is like taking ownership for things that I have done wrong and not just skirting past those. And that to me is modeling the way of promoting a culture of self-feedback. So by using that language of taking ownership, you're not necessarily apologizing, you're just owning your part in the situation. So like, I take ownership for not getting the schedule out on time. And just like modeling that sort of like self feedback or self awareness, I think can really go a long way. Check-ins, I think using the verbiage check-in, I I just think that is really it it communicates what it really is. So by asking someone to like, hey, could I check in with you? That like creates space. So when my office is right next to the rock wall. My staff are here, but they're busy, they're doing a lot of stuff, and sometimes I just need to talk to them. I'll go back and say, hey, can I check in with you, and you've got a free moment. That to me initiates that, like, hey, we're about to like communicate over something a little bit more than just hey, how's it going, or we're working back at the rock wall together. So being intentional about when you're giving feedback or want to initiate that to create space. Step back. So this is a conflict de-escalation tool. So stepping back. So let's say something isn't going well, you can always revisit the conversation. I just wanted to throw that on there to show that, like, you can always, if something isn't going well, you're giving feedback, somebody's not feeling so hot. I know that I've been in, you can think of, like, I was in my professor's office one time doing research, and I didn't show up, and I like burst into tears one time. And he was like, hey, go take a second, go get a drink of water, and we'll come back and we'll keep talking about it. And that was like everything I needed to be able to kind of re-step into that space. And so just know that, like, you can take a step back, you can empower the person that you are giving feedback to take a step back. That is totally okay. And then finally, wanted to end on a bit of a positive note. Affirmations, or even appreciations, I think is another word there. Be cool to differentiate. But remember that positive feedback is a tool absolutely in a lot of different ways. I don't know who told me this. I almost wanted to put a quote on here, but no, I heard somebody say, no one ever left their job for being appreciated too much. And that's just something that stuck with me. I don't know who said it, so I didn't put it on there. But anyways, remember to appreciate your people. And that's where that positive, specific feedback comes into play. Whether it's, we have these little kudos things that we will stick for our staff. I keep them on my cork board outside my office for them to see. There's a lot of different ways that you can do that, but just remember to appreciate your staff or your patrons or your supervisors for what they're doing well, and maybe they'll keep doing it. So a couple tools there for you. Moving on. Okay, so we just talked a lot about giving feedback as a skill. We talked about some tips and strategies, as well as some tools. Now we're going to transition into receiving feedback and what that means. So out of curiosity, let's go ahead and send it back to you all. How do you prefer to receive feedback? So I kind of asked earlier, what are some effective strategies for giving it? On your end, how do you like to receive it? So yeah, go ahead and maybe throw something in there, share with us. Awesome. I see that we've got face-to-face, 1, 2, 3, 4 times in person. I'm seeing timely on there 4 or 5 times. Ooh, I really like this. In a personal conversation in a timely manner so appropriate adjustments can be made. Awesome. One-on-one, start with something good. I love hearing that one because that to me kind of shares a little bit more as to how that person likes to receive feedback. So maybe, you know, when I might want to engage there, I might be able to better serve them. That's great. Cool. All right. Thanks for sharing, y'all. Cool. So when you're receiving feedback, here are a couple tips for you. Take time to reflect and digest before responding. This is something that I continually need practice with. It seems like as of late. Yesterday, my partner was like, "Your fridge smells. You need some baking soda in there." I was like, "No, it doesn't. I just need to throw out whatever's bad." And then I was like, I was working on this presentation. I was like, and then I immediately went back and took ownership for being defensive and appreciated that feedback. And so this to me is something that hits home personally. So just remember to take time, reflect, and digest before you respond. If feedback is vague, ask for examples. It's always okay if someone shares something and it doesn't you don't have all the information, go ahead and ask for more. And that final one, if you won't listen, others won't either. And so, you know, well, I'm going to speak for myself here. I love giving feedback. I love having conversations with empowering folks around me to improve. And I love getting feedback as well. But sometimes I can definitely have a bit of a guard up. And so if I have my guard up, you know, maybe others wouldn't be as willing to listen to me either. So something to consider there. Listen carefully, listen objectively, search for potential value. There is usually truth. So the nice thing about feedback is that you can take it or leave it. That choice is yours. But oftentimes there's something in there that you can take away from it. There's probably is something in my fridge that I need to throw away. And that's something that I didn't really consider yesterday afternoon. So anyways, and remember to say thank you, because it's an act of courage to give someone feedback and share something in hopes of it being constructive for them. So I wanted to talk a little bit about listening specifically as well and what that means. I've got a quote here that I really like. There are people who, instead of listening to what is being said to them, are already listening to what they are going to say themselves. I feel like in fast-paced environments or conversations, always moving on to the next thing, I can be guilty of this, but that is definitely something to consider when considering listening. So a couple tips. Focus on the speaker. If someone is speaking, try to give them your undivided attention. I know I'm guilty of zoning out sometimes. Model and show that you're listening. Seek to understand not only words, but feelings, and kind of listen in between the lines. And remember that to suspend that initial judgment and let those words kind of sink in. Give that person space to communicate, because then when you want to gain that space to communicate, you can have that back too. So yeah, a couple thoughts on that. One tip that I really like is that and this kind of goes back to more of the feedback, like the feedback thing, or like a feedback session. I like to ask sometimes when someone is sharing something, ask if people would want like advice on that, or just to listen. This goes back to the listening sort of things. So sometimes if someone is sharing something with you, your opinion might not always be the initial thing that they need. They might just, for example, if a staff person might have a problem with something, maybe they just need a listening ear, or maybe they do want actionable advice and your thoughts and opinion too. So that is like a listening tip that, again, I don't know where I got that, but I really do like and appreciate that. So just a little tip there. Okay, cool. Let's move on to forums for feedback. So we're campus recreation professionals. I think Mike asked the question a couple times. So go ahead and just answer the question, where is feedback applicable in campus recreation? And also maybe where would you like to see it if you haven't seen it in certain places? Awesome. Everywhere seems like it's the resounding theme. Yes, employees, participants, awesome. So yeah, pretty obvious on this one. Couple just ideas, or just kind of brainstorming a little bit more. Feedback is super important with training and developing your student staff so they know where they're at and where they need to be. Professional staff evaluation. I know we're about to do ours here at Marshall University, and there's going to be a feedback session there. University administration, looking, that somebody mentioned, like, how do I give feedback to my supervisor? Or how does maybe my supervisor or my director give feedback to their, going onwards and upwards. And so that's super important. When implementing programs. So for me, like leading trips and running trips and, empowering students to climb back at the rock wall. The belay device needs to be used in a proper direction, and I have to give that feedback when it's not happening. And so how do I do that? Just like that, managing of participants and patrons as well. And so a lot of these different tactics and these more characteristics we see pop up everywhere. So cool. So final takeaways. What are some things, so kind of getting to the end here, what are some things that you have, maybe what's the biggest thing that you've learned from or taken away from this presentation? Cool. Sweet. Awesome. Glad that you all like the CFR model. I will share. So awesome. Thanks, everybody. One other thing I'd like to share, kind of in the same lines of the CFR model. So, and there's other models that are kind of in that. The CFR model is kind of like, that is how you kind of deliver. How you deliver like feedback in one direction. Another model, and this is kind of more of like a team building or a group processing model. So like getting a group, and so kind of a 2-way or 2+, a 3-way, a 10-way feedback model. It's that I've used before. It's called the VOMP, or the VOMP model. So so VOMP stands for voice, ownership, empathy, and plan. So the way that it kind of works in like a group process. So let's say, there's like conflict among a team of some sort, and we know what that subject is. Can kind of come together and go around and all take turns sharing our voice with regards to what's going on, our ownership with regards to that conflict or that subject, maybe sharing some empathy with each other as far as that issue or that subject, and then making a plan going forward. So kind of using similar things to the CFR, but it can kind of be used a little bit more as like a group process thing. So again, sharing voice, sharing our ownership, empathizing with each other, and then making a plan going forward. So take that as you will. Cool. Some final thoughts from me on this. This is something to practice with intentionality. Somebody mentioned like how to give feedback to our like supervisors. I have with different programs, when I'm like out in the field on like a leadership development program, when I'll do a lesson on feedback, I will challenge my students to give me, as their leader or their instructor, this could be, college students or even high school students, to give me feedback on how I'm doing in front of the rest of the group. Because in the future, they're going to need to know how to give feedback to maybe their superiors, but that's not an easy thing to do. And so that's something to practice or empower others to practice. I love it when my staff here at Marshall give me feedback on what I can learn. I really try to have them create avenues so that they can do that. Check your communication. How are you being heard? This is something that I know that I always need to continue to be working on, to be something I need to keep working on and be aware of. I know how I think I'm being heard, but how are others hearing me? And being kind of self and group aware of that. Challenge the process. So, there are a lot of different mediums for feedback, and we kind of brainstormed a couple. But in campus rec, there's always more. I know that in my program area, I need to work on evaluation as programs end and come back. That's an avenue of feedback. That's not something that's happening right now, but it should. So kind of challenging that process, and model the way. If you are showing respect and empathy and caring when you're giving, or even harder, receiving feedback, I think that goes a long way and really promotes effective communication to whoever you're interacting with. So those are kind of my final thoughts here. Feedback practice for you all. I'm going to invite you all to share one piece of positive feedback and one piece of constructive feedback for me on this presentation with regards to anything. I have set this on private, so this I think let's hope this should not be displayed. So I'm hoping that it shows up as far as the numbers of responses, but this should not pop up. Maybe I'll test it. Great. I sent one and it worked, so feel free to go ahead. Awesome. I'll leave this slide up just so that if anybody's finishing typing up anything, no rush or anything, but that is the end of my presentation. Thank you all, especially those 8 of you that I've seen, 9 of you that have given me some feedback. I appreciate your acts of service to helping me be better with my presenting. So again, thank you all so much for taking the time. And if you all would like to ask any questions or open up any questions for discussion, I'd be happy to pop off or pop aside and have any of that. So any questions or thoughts, comments, concerns, questions?
Hey, Sam, this is Bob. I got a question for you.
Yeah.
You seem very practiced at this. How long have you been doing group facilitation?
Let's see. I started group facilitation maybe I'd say 4 or 5 years now. Probably on this closer to 4. Let's go 5 years part-time, 4-ish years doing it a little bit more. So yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. I did a lot of at-risk programs, and then I did a lot of facilitation for different groups on campus at, especially when I was in grad school for like the med schools. Or the med school, we do the physics department. We would always do the business school. So yeah. Anyways.
Have you noticed over the years if student employees have changed in how they like to receive feedback?
That's a good question.
That's a good question to ask in general to anybody.
Yeah. And maybe this is maybe changing jobs or maybe it is time, but I personally feel like I'm having a harder time calling my student staff into like the space of like we are a team and we are the source of like moving this forward, and oftentimes feel as though they're like, well, we'll do it you tell me because you're our boss and everything, whereas like I feel like in the past I've had more experience where they are like going after it and wanting to contribute more. But that could be a whole number of different things. So anybody have other thoughts on that?
Yes, Sam, I can jump in. David Gaskins from George Mason. Just from being in the field for a lot of years, over 30 now, I've kind of watched a transition in how people take feedback. And I think it's harder now for the students of today to take any feedback, because I get the feeling in a lot of cases that many of them have not been told anything that was not "you're wonderful," you're doing everything great. And it's a little bit harder for them to take feedback that may be constructive at design and helping them improve, because they don't get a lot of that sometimes.
Something I've also found with our students who do enjoy getting feedback is it's helpful to have it written down. Sometimes it may be the field that I work in, working with officials, there's so much going on and you're out on a court or on a field where there's a lot going on. And so having that where they can go back and revisit it later is helpful. Just knowing there are so many distractions in the moment when you are receiving that feedback.
David, I tend to agree with you. I think I've noticed, I haven't been in here quite as long as you have, but I'm getting on 20 years now. And it seems like our student employees have heard that what Sam called the candy feedback.
Yep.
The vague, positive, hey, everything's great, you're doing super, and there's really nothing behind it. And then when they don't get that every time, every shift, they start to get down. Why aren't you telling me I'm special? And some of us don't work that way. Like, I'm going to tell you you're doing great when you're doing great. And I'm going to say, thanks for working when you're doing what I need you to do. So we have a lot of conversations at the beginning of the school year about what they can expect in terms of feedback from me as a supervisor to help calibrate their expectations. But even then, it's continual, it's ongoing. I have to remind them, hey, when I give you constructive feedback, it's not because I hate you. It's actually because I like you a lot and I want you to get better.
Yeah, and somebody mentioned officiating just a second ago, and obviously worked for years with that national basketball tournament. And one of the things that we stressed with the evaluation staff is that we're going to be constructive, and we're not there to tear people down, but we are there to be authentic and to tell them the things that they need to hear. And I saw Jonathan Sanders in here earlier, so he knows about how that works in the officiating realm. You don't always get a choice how you're going to get the feedback. And we coached people to be constructive and not to be mean with their feedback. But sometimes it's just a matter of applying some of the points that Sam provided earlier about reflect, listen to the content of the message, and don't get too caught up in how it's delivered, because sometimes you're not always going to get it the way that you want to hear it.
I think one thing for me that I've done, I let my students know in the beginning of the year that I'm going to give them all feedback face-to-face for the most part. And that's just how I'm going to do it. I'd have a lot of individual meetings with all the students, but I do it consistently, so they know I'm consistently going to give them the same form of feedback, as opposed to, 1 week it's over email, 1 week it's on paper, the next week it's in person. And I always tell them I can follow up with an email with all this information if you'd like. Most of the time I do it whether or not they say yes or no, just so they can have it in writing, and I can have it in writing saying I followed up with them also. So I think being consistent with the type is super important for students nowadays, because they like things the same consistently.
I think one thing that's important to consider is that an underlying kind of ethic of trust and respect and care that that I know that for me, when I receive feedback, that if I know like above all, that like this person has compassion and care for me, then that is something that I'm much more willing to receive that feedback. I guess I'm kind of considering maybe more of like the subject of officiating and like maybe like a national tournament where like I'm coming in and I don't know these people like right off the bat, who's going to be giving me feedback. That could be harder. And I'm trying to think of strategies like how could, I guess one thing I'd invite is like, how could we ensure that the people that maybe we're giving feedback in these like quick, newer environments that they can trust us when we're saying like, hey, this is what you need to improve upon.
It's a
So
great,
just kind of reminding that like trust and respect is key.
yeah, that's a great comment. And I used to have some of our officials who would come back from tournaments and they didn't like the way that they got some feedback and they would talk about it. And so when we were working with the officials at the tournament, one, we would coach the staff on how we want to deliver the feedback. And two, we would put that in our expectations about receiving feedback and why the people that are there are giving it to them and the credentials of the people, that these are people that are not going to steer them wrong, and they can trust in their knowledge and what we're there for, that none of the people there are getting paid to provide the feedback. They're there because they want to give back to the game. And so that's part of setting that stage of how people can be receptive to the feedback and what the purpose of it is.
Does anybody have anything else to add? Okay. All right, well, thank you for everybody for attending this session, and thank you to Sam for sharing with us. Please fill out the survey on this session that has been placed in the chat so we can provide feedback to the presenter and to continue to improve our workshop. And then please refer to the website for upcoming sessions. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Double the feedback.